Arshu, thank you so much for doing this with us, like our first Meet the Editor segments at the Polis Project. We were just having a conversation, Madhuri and I, mostly about the culture vertical, because it's been a little over a month. At least one newsletter has gone out on Substack that's sort of giving a sense for our audience about what the culture segment is going to look like. And I think, well, with you, with politics, I mean, of course the Polis Project has always had a quote unquote political vertical. It's the basis of its founding. But you've joined earlier this year. Can you tell us what it is that you are doing to shape this? Like, just, I mean, is there anything different? What are you trying to bring to the table?
Yeah, I think in many ways, like you said, Polis has always been quite political, and in many ways, I think I'm sort of just taking forward the work that Polis has been doing. So I think of it in a couple of ways. One is the main idea of what we're trying to do is tell what we think are important stories which are not often told. That in and of itself is quite a sort of broad, vast ambit. So I focus it down a bit in a few ways. And partly by what I mean by sort of continuing Polis's work is part of that is just trying to sort of stay true to this sort of Polis motto of research, reportage, resistance. So I try to commission pieces that would fall within that. Apart from that, I think how I go about it is I commission our sort of even within our team when we're sort of discussing what sort of pieces to look at, we look at it in terms of three broad ambits. That's authoritarianism in policy and practice, communities in resistance, and state violence and minorities. While covering these topics, I think of it as too broad. Forgive me for using this very sort of corporate term, but two broad verticals. I hate that I've said that more than you hate that I've said that, but two broad verticals of like projects and long forms. So we have a few ongoing research projects. Watch the State, of course, being sort of the flagship Polis one that started in 2019 with the anti-CAA movement. And since I've joined, we've also launched the Disappearance Project, which looks at the idea of disappearance, state enforced disappearances through three frameworks of disappearance of bodies, of lands, and of mind. Then we've launched the Demolitions Project, which is looking at this sort of notion of bulldozer justice regime, but also looking at it through a different framework of a ethnographic lens, and looking exclusively at extrajudicial punitive demolition and looking at it beyond the incident of demolition itself. So not looking at it on the day of the demolition or the fact that it's demolished, but looking at sort of how these lives have been affected, what's changed, what does that demolition mean for that locality. We're trying to create sort of demolitions map of the country. Some of these things are sort of ongoing, but that's part of that. And the latest one we just started was Watch the Resistance, which has been quite sort of exciting to do because I think as it's a bit gross to quote myself from my own newsletter, but I think as I sort of mentioned in that, in many ways it sort of felt like this was part of the missing puzzle already because we've had that research and reportage come through in our pieces, and that resistance thing we didn't really have a focused angle on, and this is sort of the outlet for that. It tracking social movements across the country and different types of resistance that are happening, and we've had some great pieces published on that.
And also, Watch the State sort of falls into a similar ambit, right? Like,
Watch the State, I think, like, is the sort of flip side of the coin. So the idea of Watch the State is to put the spotlight on the state and its excesses and its violence and what all it's committing and sort of violations of law, etc. Whereas Watch the Resistance, being the flip side, is looking at how the communities respond to that. So what is the resistance movements? What are the different social movements in the country? How are people responding to the state? Because I think often journalism, as it should, holds only the state accountable, but then what you miss out in that reporting is how are people responding, because there is always, I think, more resistance than you tend to realize there is, because we're all just sort of doom scrolling how shit everything is, but we don't realize that there is there is always some sort of resistance as well. So the idea is to sort of try and capture both.
Talking about doom scrolling, right? Like, is that like the challenge also editorially? Because I know I do comms, and we've had this discussion, and we work almost at different paces, or at least that's what I assume. Like, I've never really been part of an editorial process. Like, do you like what are like things that are challenging with working in that capacity? Also, because Polis is focused on research, right? And these are, like you were saying, with disappearance and demolitions, and also our long form essays. They are long term research projects, and research takes its time, and we're not responding like to a news cycle. But then there's also these sort of, watch the resistance and watch the state that kind of enable that sort of quick response or recording or documenting, which is also part of the work we do. Has anything changed in the editorial sense that's challenging but also like fun? Like, I mean, is it more challenging and less fun, or as both equally like?
I think if it were trying to keep up with that daily news cycle, that might have presented its own challenges.
Mhm.
I mean, partly we sort of consciously chosen not to do that, and I think Polis previously as well had not. But I also don't. I think partly just because there is plenty of that. That's not what's missing from media publications. I think what there is less of is publications that look at more systemic issues that is sort of more grounded by that detailed research or reportage. That said, it's not like this doesn't present its own challenges, of course. I mean, I think partly just being a newsroom, there is always a sort of tendency and a instinct to report on everything now. Like, the state violence is happening now. How can we not respond to it now? And sometimes it does, you have to
Mm.
consciously think about taking a step back and sort of studying the situation and what needs to be said, what doesn't need to be immediately said, what needs to be studied a bit more, what is the context for it, and sometimes just sort of making those decisions requires some discipline. Then apart from that, I mean, just also when you are finally doing those more detailed research
Mm.
pieces, then there's the challenge of how do you produce that sort of detailed work that will still be read. Like
Mm.
right now, I am editing a 9,000 word piece, which it's a great piece, but I don't know how many people are going to put in the time to read 9,000 words. That, of course, is where you come in and sort of
Yeah.
keep telling me to do more video pieces, do sort of more multimedia pieces, because that does have a greater circulation. So it's sort of trying to figure out how do you produce work that has sufficient depth and nuance, but will also have the reach that we want it to have. I think that's perhaps one of the greater challenges.
I know there's, I mean, people can subscribe to our Substack, right? Which is like I mean, just to sort of plug that in right now, because Arshu sends out the newsletter at the first week of every month, usually sort of giving
Yeah.
a sense of what can they read in your newsletter, Arshu?
Normally, if there's anything particularly pressing that
Hmm.
I want to write about, it might have that because we don't do daily news, but sometimes I don't know, think that's something I do want to comment on. It'll always have a sort of roundup of what the previous month was, sort of trailer of what the next month will be. Um, Talking about our other ongoing projects and maybe something else.
A final question for now, which is, what do you look for in like pieces now? Because I know that we have researchers, within the team, but you also take like long form, pieces. People do pitch it. We don't have like an open call at the moment like we do for the culture segment. So, but is there something you can let others know, so if they ever want to think about reaching out to us?
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, part of it is, like I said, those three sort of broad frames of looking at it: authoritarianism in policy and practice, communities in resistance, and state violence and minorities. Apart from that, it should be something that's not been reported before, because we're not looking to replicate reportage, even though, I mean, that may have its place, but we want to produce original research, original reportage. Um, Third, I think, I mean, I'm always a bit biased to narrative storytelling. But so I mean, no, that's not to say that. So I mean, I think even great research can be told in that sort of narrative style. Um, Apart from that, I think while we do have invariably a focus on India, we are constantly looking to publish from around the world as well. So, if I think, especially if there's a transnational comparative
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
uh, approach or angle to the story, I think that would be particularly fantastic too.
Cool. All right. Thanks, Ashu. I think that was, I mean, mostly what I wanted to, yeah, just sort of start this segment with giving a sense of, how you're thinking and what you're thinking about, and also introducing what you do within the political desk, so to speak. And you also work with Aritri, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who also joined us
Yes.
recently. How's that
It's
going?
quite good. I'm very happy
Good.
to have another
Yeah.
editor on team. Yeah.
Yeah, good. It's like nice to have that. Yeah. No, thanks so much. So maybe we'll again meet like another time and maybe speak a little bit more about some of the pieces and what you're kind of keen on working on at the moment. And yeah, maybe there'll be some other questions that'll come up. Let's see. Maybe others will have questions that they can also send us. Who
Who knows?
knows? If this becomes a super viral
Yeah.
popular segment.
Let's see how many people watch this.
A girl can hope. Okay, so chalo.
All
Thanks,
right.
Ashu.
Thank you.